Hey, everybody, welcome to another edition of In the Umpire's Clubhouse. Today we're going to the Pacific Northwest, and we've got a special guest with us today, a good friend of Jimmy and Dale's, John Canzano, who is working at 750 AM The Ticket in Portland, and he's also a columnist. So, John, we're going to have you regale us with your stories. Welcome to the show and welcome to the insanity.
Oh man, I'm happy to be in the clubhouse. I feel like I should be, yeah, taking some of that river mud and rubbing up a ball or something. Is this what we do?
That's what you do. You got to do that.
Yeah,
You first, you're a rookie, so
yeah.
and you got to take our bags too, since you're a rook. So, you know.
Is there hazing? Is there hazing like that in the umpire ranks? Like when you're new, you're a rookie in the big leagues, are you
Well, you know
carrying the
what?
bags?
There used to be. Let me tell you a quick story. Um, Larry, God, his name, Larry, old time umpire. He was the crew chief. I will get the name in a second. Jimmy, he was a supervisor
Yeah, yeah,
when,
yeah, yeah,
when
yeah.
we first started. Anyway,
Larry
he
Barnett.
was the crew chief, and he would say to his crew, "Listen, only the crew chief answers the door. Answers the phone. Only the crew chief answers the phone, right?" And they go, "Okay, you're really important." So one night they're in Boston, and their old clubhouse there for us was small. It was above the Boston Red Sox clubhouse, and they were literally, it was like a stall within the lockers, where the bathroom was. And Larry was in the stall doing his business, and the phone rings, and the three guys just looked at each other and said, "Well, you know." So pretty soon it rings. It rings. Finally, you hear this son of a bitch, and you hear some rustling. Here comes Larry, comes flying out of this stall with like some toilet paper hanging on. And he goes, answers the phone. He goes, "Oh, it's for you."
I love it.
Was it Larry Barnett?
No,
No, no, it was even
no,
before him.
it's
I will come up with that name.
there are
Unbelievable. He was a supervisor.
yes, back in the day when and it was right around the time it ended with kind of like Dale and my generation. But when we first went to the big leagues, we were expected to actually grab suitcases, and it was our job to put them in either put them in the van or whatever we were doing. The crew chief never touched his bag, never. And that got old real quick, especially with our generation. And things drastically changed after that because, somebody would say, "Hey, kid, grab my bag." And, the response was usually you go pound sand. So um, yeah, there used to be a big time hazing process, and you had to work to get your respect. So it was very interesting.
Hey,
So is
Dale,
there so is there hazing in the sports?
In
Uh,
the sports media world? No,
yeah.
no, I wouldn't say there's hazing, but there is kind of a pecking order and there's a hierarchy. And when you are like one of the longtime, more established reporters on a beat or somebody, in a news conference, that they will call on you first. The PR people look to you, the coach looks to you. I think some of that comes with paying your dues. But the problem is probably much like what you guys saw is that the media industry has eroded to the point where like younger and younger people are getting promoted faster and faster. And so now you have everything out of balance and out of whack. And you've got older media members on the beat looking over going, you shouldn't even be asking that question in this news conference. You haven't been here long enough to be called on in this news conference or to act like you are in charge of this news conference. And so it's funny. I've had coaches who are up on the news conference podium and they're getting a question from a young reporter. I've had, Division I football coaches basically go, text me from the thing saying, who the hell does this guy think he is? And it's just interesting to kind of see that. But I think you get that with experience and time. You guys probably had those relationships with managers and players that you just kind of understood each other. There's a certain degree of respect that comes with that.
I had a incident one time in Yankee Stadium with Joe Torre, and a very he didn't even he was up and coming umpire, and he was just filling in for the weekend, and he had to play at the plate, and Joe didn't like the outcome, so Joe came out and kind of got into the young umpire, And the young umpire actually said something to Joe that probably would get somebody fired in the real world. But in the baseball world, it's a little bit different. The profanities and stuff like that are sometimes taken with a grain of salt. But if it had been on the street, it would have been a brawl. And I finally got down there, and Joe looked at me and says, "I don't know who the blank this kid thinks he is." And I just looked at him, and I was walking him away back to his dugout, and I just said to him, "Joe, I will take care of it." And so, just exactly like you're talking about, those cases actually happen in professional sports also with referees, officials, and umpires. And I actually had to sit this kid down, and the kid just didn't get it.
Mm.
Just didn't get, and in retrospect, the kid didn't get a job either.
Yeah.
Because he was that way with his supervisors, with veteran umpires. And so I can understand how you guys can maybe look around the room and say, what the hell?
Yeah. Well,
You know,
if you're having that problem with a coach or you're having a problem, you're going to have a problem with everybody.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
that's not somebody that's easy to work with. And people don't think of it this way. Like, so I worked at 6 different newspapers and I had different jobs at those newspapers. My first job was at a small community paper. I was covering little league games. I was taking phone calls from high school coaches. And I think there's something that gets, the reps that you get and the things you learn at those small stops, probably not all that different than your industry, learning and making your mistakes when there isn't, 50,000 people watching you.
Right.
And you learn to navigate difficult relationships and work together as a crew. All that stuff is important. And in media, what we're seeing because of the erosion of the industry is kids right out of school are getting promoted into major beats and they haven't learned the things they don't know what they don't know.
Is that is the reason for that, or one of the reasons for that, social media now and everything's so accessible immediately, like right now? Is that part of the problem with paying your dues at the newspaper or such and stuff like that? Is social media a contributor to that?
Yeah, I think it's a whole nother tentacle to it. But yeah, there's a urgency to have it first and not even to have it accurate. Like there's a lot of hedging that goes on. And, this person is a target. Jason Kidd is being, the Knicks want to talk to Jason Kidd. Well, what does that mean? They haven't asked permission. They're not really talking to him yet. They haven't offered him the job. Does he even want the job? It's just somebody trying to be first to put that news out there. So that rush to be first creates just this frenzy of inaccuracy, and it erodes the trust of the public in media. That's a hard thing you have to overcome if you're one of the, I try to be super sourced. I try to go in depth. Like yesterday, Pac-12 presidents and ADs are on this call. They're on this Zoom call for 90 minutes yesterday morning. And I'm communicating with people who are in the meeting. Like I'm texting with people who are in the meeting. And I'm going, what are they talking about? I'm asking questions. I'm getting information. I put some of that out there, and then I look at what else is out on the internet, and people are just guessing. Like they're just throwing stuff out to act like they have some kind of authority or some kind of, they have some kind of sourcing, which they don't. And so it does create a lot of mud and a lot of noise. And as we've learned, and I think the politicians are better than this than anybody, you can just say something, and if you keep saying it, there's a faction of people out there that are going to believe it. And so that's a problem. But the bigger issue in media is, when I went to work at my last newspaper, I've since gone on my own. I'm independent now. I'm writing for my own readers, and it's been great. But my 6th newspaper was the Oregonian. When I got hired, they had 68 employees in the sports department. When I walked out and I said, hey, I'm going to go on my own, they had 8. And so how do you cover anything? And how do you get the best and the brightest when you're no longer paying for it?
Right,
and so,
right.
I kind of think like I get a lot of young college kids who come to me and say, hey, how do I get your job? How do I get to where you are? How do I host a radio show? And what I have noticed is that the pool of candidates isn't as deep or bright as it once was. I think, the best and the brightest are picking other industries. And so you have this real erosion. And then what happens? Newspaper decides someone's retiring. What are they going to do? This isn't like the Major League Umpires Association where they go, hey, who's the best ump in AAA? No, they go down and go, who's the cheapest umpire? We can get a guy from, who's umpiring community college games and bring him to the big leagues. And that's what's happening in media.
Wow.
Well, it's a lot like if you watch ESPN now, I don't know where they get these guys, Sports Center and stuff. They're all trying to be comedians, laughing and cutting, and they're not giving you any
Yeah.
information. It's like, can I top you with this? And then you get the baseball trade deadlines where everybody is making up rumors to beat the band. I mean, A-Rod's being traded to here and here, and nothing comes of it. These guys can write whatever they want because they know they're not going to get checked, and they're just throwing shit against the wall and hoping it
Yeah.
sticks.
Well,
I think, yeah, go ahead, Dale.
I was going to say, John, by the way, Larry Knapp. It was Larry Knapp that I was
Larry
talking
Knapp,
about.
that's it. That's it.
Just driving me crazy.
How long did it take you to look that up?
Well, I had to look in my book.
I was going to say Poncino, but I didn't think that would be.
No, Larry Knapp. He was that's a whole nother podcast. Yeah. But
Larry
John,
Knapp
you're talking
Larry
about.
Knapp was a boxer, by the way.
He was a boxer. Get in there like a boxer. Yeah.
Get in there like a boxer.
You were talking about some of these people are just putting stuff out, just guessing, which I was accused of for 30 plus years. But I understand, I understand what you're saying. But the transition that you made, because you started in print journalism, and now you've had for quite a while now your radio show.
Yeah.
And you've done TV, obviously, with KGW in Portland, and I'm sure other places. Was that a just a natural transition? Was that just an offer that suddenly you just dove into it, or how did that all work?
Yeah, I never imagined that I would
Look at
do.
this face. Look
Well,
at
I know
radio.
it's a
Oh,
face
come on
made
now.
for radio, dude.
face.
Look, I never thought I'd do TV or radio. I was a print journalist. I'm a writer. I'm a storyteller. But what became valued over time was content. If you have access to the information and you can convey it, suddenly television and radio, there was a real need for quality content. And so I remember, when I got offered the radio show for the first time, it was 20 years ago. I had no idea how to get in and out of a commercial break. I didn't know what I was doing. The show probably sounded terrible. I have since figured all that stuff out, but it was more of me being sort of open-minded and knowing that the industry was moving in that direction. And I think one thing that has kept me relevant and has been a constant for me has been that I've watched a lot of people be allergic to, social media. Oh no, we're just print journalists. We should not be on TV or radio. If you go to radio stations, they've got a website where they have people writing now, and they're doing video. The TV stations are doing written work, and they're doing audio podcasts. The radio stations, everybody's doing everything. The newspapers are doing podcasts. So there's just, it's now this amalgam of content that they're trying to monetize. But I just kept an open mind, and I saw a lot of people who were really adverse to change. And some of them are older, and you probably see this in umpiring too, where they started, we're going to use technology now for the balls and strikes, and people go, I don't need this looking over my shoulder. I'm not going to. I saw that in the media world too, where longtime reporters were like, I'm not going to get on social media, and I'm like, you're about to be left behind, unless you figure this out, at least try to dabble in it. So that kind of helped me having that open mind. I also think that I saw the potential for my brand to blossom with this combination of radio, TV, and print. It came with challenges. The newspaper didn't like that I would do a radio show from the road after they were paying the travel expenses. The newspaper wanted a podcast. The radio station, even though my contract said I'm to do a 3-hour radio show, they were like, well, wait a minute. Could you do some written work for our website as well? And I said, no, I can't do that. I need, separation of church and state. So it caused me some headaches over time where I had to really kind of mitigate problems and get the sides to talk to each other and be like, who's paying for the rental car? Who's paying for the hotel room? Who's paying for the airfare? And in the end, it was part of what drove me to leave the newspaper world, because I was like, do I really need to be under the banner of a formal newspaper, or can I just be johncanzano.com? And I remember I had a coffee with the executive editor and the publisher at the paper, and they were telling me, you're throwing away 20 years if you walk out the door. You go on your own. And I turned to the editor and I said, I don't think I need you. And she said, you're probably right. And I just don't. I mean, I think people are now willing to go direct to the source for the product, and you can order anything on Amazon, or you can have a subscription on Netflix, and so I feel like as long as you're delivering quality content, people are going to find you. I've got another year left on my radio contract. I don't know. Do I need to do terrestrial radio, or can I do what you guys are doing? Like there's a lot out there, and to your credit, you guys have morphed and been adaptable.
But one
Yeah,
of the things,
it reminds me of streaming, kind of what you're talking
Yeah.
about. Now I can individually, I'll pay for this because I know I'm going to get the stuff I want to,
Yeah.
that I'm interested in, and it's going to be accurate and it's going to be fair and all of that stuff. And just by the way, for people that aren't familiar with John, I mean he's from the garlic capital of the world, or that's where you grew up, right? Gilroy.
Yeah. Gilroy.
But I mean, you've worked at papers where you're on the beat with Indiana basketball and Bobby Knight, UNLV with Tarkanian,
Yeah.
which had to be full of stories. You've covered Olympics, the NFL, MLB. Did you do an NBA beat?
Yeah, I've covered a number of NBA finals, and
Right.
Portland having an NBA team. I've been
How
around.
many Olympics?
5 Olympics. Yeah.
Is that because there's so much going on in the Olympics? How
Yeah.
do you whittle that down to the stories you want to cover? Or I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I had Adrian Wojnarowski, who ended up at ESPN, was when I was at the Fresno Bee, I followed in his footsteps there. He was the columnist at the Fresno Bee. He then went on to ESPN. I came into Fresno, and I remember Woj telling me, he said, it takes you an Olympics to figure out how to cover an Olympics, and I didn't know what he was talking about. But I go to Sydney in 2000, and I'm used to covering a story every day. I can write columns, but you're looking at this board of events that's going on every day for like 21 days. And every single one of these events is this culminating moment in someone's life, like Rulon Gardner's wrestling, or, a different Olympics, Michael Phelps is swimming, or Usain Bolt is running. And those are just the headliners. You can go over to ping pong and you can find people in tears and agony of defeat and the thrill of victory at every single event. It is emotionally draining. That first Olympics, I lost 11 pounds in 21 days. I wasn't eating because I was trying to get around to all the different events, and I was trying to cover everything. And I remember talking to Woj at the Olympics, and he was like, you need to be in one place and just do it really well. Forget about what NBC is doing, because I got news for your viewers. NBC and the TV programming that you get on the Olympics, that's not what's really happening at the Olympics. It's the Americanized version of what's happening that is, basically them picking the most marketable event that they know people will tune in to watch and putting it on TV. I often found that, like, there were amazing stories. In Sydney in 2000, there was a woman named Kathy Freeman who was running for Australia. She was running the women's 400 meters. She was of Aboriginal descent. And there was, I didn't even know this. I get to Sydney and I see this real class issue between Native Australians who are Aboriginal and then the white Australians. And, in the restaurants, the white people were working out front. And in the back of the restaurant, you would have the Aboriginal people working in the kitchen. And I was like, gosh, this is a real class issue. Well, Kathy Freeman won the women's 400. She is, Aboriginal descent. She grabs the Australian flag and the Aboriginal flag after winning and went around the stadium with them together. And it would have been lost on America. And NBC didn't even show it. I don't think they even showed it. But everybody in that stadium was crying. And I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. So by the time I got to Athens in 2004, I knew I needed to go where I thought the best story that day was and go see it. And sometimes it was a Russian. I went and covered a Russian wrestler who in qualifying for the Olympics, he had to wrestle his brother in the Russian trials. And the father refused to let the kids wrestle. He brought him into the kitchen and he said to his sons, you will settle it here at the table. You will talk to each other and decide who's going to wrestle for Russia in this weight class. You will not be wrestling each other. I don't want my sons fighting out in the public. And the sons decided that the older brother would go because the younger brother had another chance maybe in 4 years. And so I remember being at this news conference and I got chills because Stephen Abbas was wrestling for the United States in that weight class, and the Russian was wrestling. And there's the interpreter going back and forth, interpreting what's going on. And I'm watching Stephen Abbas, who's in this brotherhood of this family. This Abbas family is this wrestling family from Central California. They're prolific. And it's much the same as the Russian story. A lot of poverty and, sibling rivalries, same weight classes and all that. And as Abbas is realizing, hey, this Russian guy who's faceless before the news conference, he's got a story like I do. You could see him like craning his neck and looking down, going, this is a hell of a story. Like, these two brothers wrestled. So it's just a story like that, that every single 15-minute period, there's this draining moment happening. And I think as soon as I figured out, just go where I want to go and tell the best story I can tell, that it got easy to cover the Olympics.
Well, let's not
I got
forget-
chills. Here we
Yeah.
go. I mean,
that was
that's amazing.
That was really, really cool. Let's not forget you also covered Notre Dame football.
Yeah.
How was
Yeah.
that? I mean, back in the, I don't know how long ago it was, but
Late 90s. Yeah.
And so
Bob
that
Davie was
was-
the coach. It wasn't like a great era of Notre Dame
Right.
football, but it was Notre Dame football. And my experience with Notre Dame, being a kid who grew up in California, was, the Notre Dame fans were kind of elitists that I saw or I knew. And, the people in my town who wore a Notre Dame sweatshirt were driving a nice car and they're Notre Dame fans because it's cool to be a Notre Dame fan. I was really surprised at how rooty the crowd was at a Notre Dame home football game. It was blue collar. It was families. It was generational. It was really cool to see that. It was stocking. It was knit caps and gloves with no fingers on them. It was a really cool experience to see how blue collar that fan base was and how much they loved it and how rabid they were, because it was not at all that Notre Dame fan that we get used to seeing from the outside that NBC's putting on. But it was also a bit of a culture shock too, to kind of see Notre Dame. And, just down the road from Notre Dame at that time, Drew Brees was the quarterback at Purdue.
Yep.
And, I got to cover a few of his games, and he was a freshman at Purdue. And you could see that Brees was going to be, you couldn't have said Hall of Famer, but you could see he was going to be a big time player. And he gave Notre Dame fits. It was the very first game I covered. And then, covering Indiana basketball with Bobby Knight, he was every bit the character that is in John Feinstein's book, Season on the Brink. Intense. You're in these news conference settings, and you don't realize how big Knight is. He was a large person. He's like 6'5", and you don't get that on TV when you see him throwing the chair. And he would come into the post-game news conference, and the media who were on that Indiana beat had largely been on that beat for years. So you had a bunch of people who were just beat down by Knight just over and over, kind of just, he could grind you to dust. Very intense. And I liked him, but he was intense. And Knight would come into the room, and the first news conference, I walk in, and he's got all the reporters are sitting in those little L-shaped school desks, and they're like these big,
Right.
adults sitting in these college kids shaped desks. And I was like, I'm not sitting in one of those desks. And then he walks into the room, and he had an elevated platform that was about 4 or 5 inches. He would step up onto the platform, and then he would say, "Anybody got a question?" I mean, it was like looking up at Paul Bunyan. It was, he put himself in this incredibly intimidating posture, and all these, cowering writers were sitting in the seats. And, if you asked him a good, smart question, he would give you a fantastic answer. He was a wonderful teacher. Like, he could teach you the game, and he would sometimes go on these tangents that were just like so deep and rich and brilliant and smart. But if you asked him a dumb question, you had to duck, but I had an advantage because I knew Pete Newell Sr. I had covered Pete Newell Sr. and Pete Newell Jr., his son, when he was a high school coach in California. So I knew him a little bit, and he was Knight's mentor. And so when I got the job to go be a beat reporter covering Indiana basketball, Newell said, "Hey, I'm going to tell Bobby that you're coming out and that you're okay. Like, I'll give you like kind of the blessing." And so my first news conference was, it was Big Ten Media Day. I'm in Chicago at the United Center. And Pete Newell Sr. says, "All right, when you get into the news conference, you need to ask Bobby, can you win in today's game with a back to the basket center? Bobby will know then that it's you, and he's supposed to be good to you. I've told him that's the question you're going to ask. So ask it, and he'll give you the blessing. And I can't vouch for how long it'll last, but you'll get off on the right foot." So I go to the United Center. I'm a pretty young reporter. I'm looking around. There's a lot of media covering the Big Ten. I get the microphone, and I said, "Coach, Can you win in today's game with a back to the basket center? And Bobby Knight paused and he looked out at me. There was kind of this knowing glance. And then he says, that's a great goddamn question. I never thought I could come here today and get such a question from a bunch of media members. Somebody had to have planted that question with you. And he went on and on and on about how no self-respecting media member could have possibly thought to ask that question. And we got off on the right foot, and he was at least fair to me out of the gates. I think I was the kind of person that could have played for Bobby Knight. Like, I had the mentality. I don't mind the abrasiveness and the accountability. I saw a lot of good in him. The public only got the chair throwing and the tantrums, but he was a very loyal person, kept his word. Yeah, he could be a bully, but I also knew I wasn't going to be on that beat forever. And our honeymoon ended when they played Iowa about mid-season. And if you don't mind me going on another tangent, they're playing Iowa.
Oh,
And Tom Davis is the coach at Iowa. And Bobby Knight, who's a big legacy guy, is well aware that he had the best record in the Big Ten in the 1980s and the 1970s. He needed to win this game against Iowa in like November of 98 to have the best record in the 90s. So he's like, 3 decades I've dominated the Big Ten. So he kind of goes into the game talking about that in the games and the days before the game. So I'm kind of alerted to the fact that this is an important game for Indiana. And they should win. They're on their home court. But Iowa had a great press, and they were like baseline to baseline pressing, and they were giving Indiana some trouble. And they had a big, long kid that was on the inbounds pass who had a wingspan of a 747. And he was giving Indiana a lot of problems getting the ball in bounds. They were getting a lot of deflections, and he was right up against the baseline, belly on the baseline, and just causing problems. And so Knight called timeout, and I was on press row, and so I could hear into the huddle. And Knight said, if he gets up on the baseline on you, I want you to throw baseball past the ball off his face. I said, hit him in the face with the ball. You know, this is Bob Gibson with chin music, okay, in your world. All right. So they break the huddle. I'm watching for it going, holy hell, what's going to happen here? And sure enough, the kid winds up with a baseball style pass and throws the ball off the face of the inbounds defender. The ball goes about 15 rows back into the stands, out of bounds. It's Indiana's ball still. Blood everywhere. Timeout on the court. They're fixing the kid's nose. He literally had a crisscross bandage that they applied to his face. They restart play, and he gets back up on the baseline, and they did it again. He threw it off his face a second time. And so Tom Davis, the Iowa coach, got ejected. He's yelling at Knight. Knight's yelling back. After the game, I asked Knight, I said, why did you do that? Like, you're trying to establish your excellence and your dominance. That didn't seem like an excellent moment. And he says, if that kid didn't want to get hit in the face, he shouldn't have been up on the baseline. And so that's just how he was. It was never boring.
That's kind of problematic.
Yeah, right.
But you know what? I had 2 coaches like that when I was in the playing world, and I had 2 coaches like that were the most terrifying people to other people, but to his players, he was hard, but he was also fair, and he loved every single one of us. Yeah. And I can remember him to this day, and he was actually an amateur coach. And I didn't have him in high school. It was during summer leagues and stuff like that, but he was the best coach I ever had. So I can relate to that to a little bit. So it's pretty amazing, especially on your end of it, when you actually get to see it firsthand, though.
Yeah.
I mean, it's actually pretty cool. So
yeah, well, you don't see, like, the public never saw, you know, there was a freshman center named Kirk Haston on that team, and Haston was from Tennessee, and there was a tornado that hit Tennessee and it killed his mother.
Hey.
And Bobby Knight is missing. Like, nobody knows where he is. Is he at practice? Is he recruiting? Turns out that he went and informed Haston that his mother had died and put him in the car and drove from Bloomington all the way to Tennessee to drive him back home. And then people may remember, I don't know if you remember this, the Who's Your Daddy game. They were playing, I think it was up at Northwestern, and the crowd, the student section, started yelling at a kid named William Gladness, who it was from a broken home, and they were yelling, "Who's your daddy?" like a play on Hoosier, and chanting it over and over. And Knight got so mad, he took the public address
I
microphone
do
and went
remember
out to
that.
center court and shamed the student section. And you're right, like you go to an Indiana home game during that era, you notice Knight, the intensity's there, sure, but you also notice the letterman who came back and sat in the stands. His players came back; they were still around the program decades after they had played.
If I remember correctly, when he passed away, that was a big, big deal and a huge showing of veteran players from Indiana. If I
Yeah,
remember that correctly, I
yeah.
remember seeing videos about that and the response after his death on how many people you know showed up, and there wasn't a bad thing said about Bobby Knight during that
Yeah.
time either.
Yeah.
So
John, you have the bald face truth. Was it that started with your radio program, or did you have
Yeah,
that branding before that?
we had the I
how
went
did
on air and
how
I
did
said
you come up with that name?
I it was going to be the John Canzano show, and I went on air and I said, if no one comes up with a better name for the show, we're calling it the John Canzano show. And a caller called in and said the bald face truth,
Really?
and I went, that actually works. Like,
That
Yeah.
does.
let's do it. And so that branding has continued, and it's luckily somebody happened to have their radio on who had a marketing brain, like otherwise we wouldn't be talking about it. And then we out of that launched the BFT Foundation, which is what you guys have been nice enough to support over the years with part of our celebrity golf tournament. And thank you guys for playing in that thing. But I got I get asked to do a lot of speaking engagements and fundraisers and stuff, and I kind of one day was thinking, this is 2009. There was a lot of budget cuts in the schools, and there was no field trips got canceled. I had a kindergartner who's now a college senior. Her field trip got canceled, and I said I want to pay for it out of pocket, and the school said, well, you can't just pay for a field trip out of pocket. And I said, why not? And they said, well, you could run it through our school. And I go, where do I write the check? And they said, can I write it to the school? And nobody knew. And so I said, what if we had a nonprofit? Could we grant a field trip to a class? And so it really started with that. And so our aim is to help kids in art, music, education, and athletics. It's pretty broad based, but we have a summer camp for special needs kids. But the biggest thing is, like, I don't know if you guys felt this way, but I kind of hit my 40s and was like, okay, it's cool. I've got this career. I'm making a living. I love what I do. But am I really making a difference? Like, when I look back, am I going to have an impact and have changed anything, or am I just tap dancing out here? And so for me, I don't work with my hands. I don't build a fence. I don't get to re-roof something. At the end of my workday, my writing and my radio show disappear into the ether. And so this is my way of maybe having something to show for the effort.
And it's been very successful, right? I mean,
Yeah.
and I know you have that was a summer camp,
Yeah. Camp Exceptional. Yeah.
right?
It's phenomenal.
Right. That should be coming up, right?
Yeah. It's coming up July 14th through the
Yeah.
18th. We do it every year. I think this is year number 12 now that the camp has been out there. And we get a lot of buy-in from college athletes, college football players at Portland State, basketball players, University of Portland, and other places that come out and they work as the team leaders. And we take special needs kids age 5 to 15, and we put them on teams with typical kids. And sometimes you look around, the kids look around, and they're not sure, like, okay, who in this group has a challenge? And part of it is it's a sports camp, but it really is a relationship camp. And I think sometimes the typical kids, I think, get more out of it than others, or maybe they get an understanding of what a kid who has autism or Asperger's or a physical disability, what they're going through at school. And maybe they see that kid at their school and they go, hey, I remember you from summer camp. And so by the Friday every year of that camp, everybody's crying when we have to say goodbye. And the college football players at Portland State are hugging the kids, and kids are showing up to their games after. It's just been a really enriching experience.
And I think that's the beauty of your foundation with the kids camp too, is that it's so broad. It's not just based on one thing. Like, I mean, back in the day, it would be just based on one thing,
Yeah.
maybe sports. And I know there's a lot of sports camps out there and everything like that, and I'm not bashing them at all, but yours is pretty wide open. And like art, music, education, athletics. I mean, that pretty much it rounds it off pretty good.
Yeah.
And
It's everything.
and I've always told you, if it's for a kid, I'll do anything. And I've had a blast in your golf tournaments, and
Yeah.
I hope Anthony and Jason got me again this year. So I'm just putting that out there. So
Well, yeah, I hope so too for them. Look, you get requested every time, Dale, you've played. I just it means a lot to me, and we get such support and buy-in from sponsors and the celebrity golfers who come back every year and want to play in it, and so it means a lot to me when I look around out there. It's a lot of planning. I'll be honest. One of the other things was we said no employees, right? We're not going to have employees of this foundation. That was the beginning, and it's very charming, right? All the money that's donated goes to the cause, but the problem with not having employees is that you don't have employees, and so I end up at like 11 o'clock at night. I'm folding envelopes and making sure I get all the whole sponsorship signs done, and my kids are working the check-in desk, and so.
and
It's been
your wife
yeah.
is actually one of the celebrity golfers, but
Yeah.
also she's your right hand man.
100%. Yeah. And it's just a real family thing. And the summer camp's the same way. My entire family, extended family comes, and we have like 22 people sleeping at our house for a week. And they all work at the camp, and they do the water station, and they do it's just a it's a big family reunion that has a bigger cause to it. And we did write the mission of the foundation broad-based because the original plan was we wanted to go to teachers who were paying for this stuff out of pocket anyway. And we wanted to say to the teachers, hey, what do you need? How can we assist you to do your job? Because you should be teaching. You can't fundraise. I can fundraise. So we'll write a grant. And so we've had things like a kindergarten teacher said, hey, I need a rug for my classroom. The kids are sitting on the rug at story time. We've had other teachers say, gosh, it'd be great. We don't go on field trips anymore. Can we go can you send the whole grade on a field trip? We've had other people say, I have some kids who come to school and they don't have shoes at the beginning of the year, and they're wearing flip-flops, and how do we get shoes on these kids? And so it's very broad-based, intentionally so. Drama programs, music instrument rentals, sports fees. And one of the coolest things ever is that I get to make some of these calls to the parents who are asking for help and teachers who are asking for help. And I'll never forget, there was a woman in Salem, Oregon. She had gone through a divorce, single mom. She was a nurse. She said, hey, my kids go to theater camp every year. I can't afford it this year. It's been a really hard year. I can only afford to send one kid to camp. And again, it goes back like to the Russian wrestlers. Like, if I have to, I'll just send the oldest kid to camp and we'll make do. But she even sent a copy of her pay stub just to be like, here's what I'm making. Here, you can see that it's a stretch for me. And the grant committee, it's lean and limber, approved that grant immediately. And they said, all right, you can call her and let her know. So I called her and I said, hey, I got good news for you. We're going to send your kid to camp, but we sent both kids to camp, and we said we got them both. You don't have to pay for one. And she started crying on the other end of the phone. And it's like, there's a lot of stuff I do. It doesn't matter. I get read a lot. A lot of people listen to the show, but that mattered that day. We made a difference for somebody.
What really matters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like Jimmy, you're wearing the shirt. I'm scared. When we've done those hospital visits during the season, they really affect you. I mean,
Yes.
I did maybe 8 or 10 of them total. And every time I enjoyed it. It just really, really, like you said, what matters, right? And it really it does affect you in such a positive way, and to be able to do that and see the smiles on everybody's faces. John, you have been, let me see here, a Baseball Hall of Fame voter.
Yeah.
For how long?
What the hell, John?
Yeah, we're not on the ballot
Here
yet.
we
Jim.
go. Here we go.
My first vote, because I started covering baseball 2001. I was the Giants were playing the Angels in the World Series that year. I was covering that. I covered some A's. The A's were really good. That was the Moneyball season. They lost to the Twins, and so I was at the San Jose Mercury News. I was the Major League Baseball writer, and they give you 10 years, the Baseball Writers Association, before you can get in. Of course, I said, I want to get a vote in the Hall of Fame. So 10 years later, when I finally got approved to get a vote, the very first ballot was the Bonds ballot, where the turd is in my lap now. Baseball, let them play. You guys tell me. The baseball let these guys play. Now I'm supposed to retroactively eyeball them, and try to figure out who used, who didn't use. You probably have a better sense than I would. And then clean it up. Like that just to me felt like that was really unfair of Major League Baseball.
Right. Right. Well,
Out of
you're
sight,
absolutely right.
out of sight, out of mind, though, for them. Out of sight, out of mind for them. And I was shocked just by what happened last week about okay, everything's just kidding.
With
All
Rose.
of a sudden, and that's going to be very interesting for you now too. Also, the same thing. So,
Well, John, you were absolutely right, though. I mean, that whole Bonds Sosa, McGuire, and the home
Yeah.
run thing. I mean, they were taking stuff that was not illegal at that
Yeah.
time by Major League Baseball, and it seems a little hypocritical to say, we didn't ban it then, but we have real issues with it or whatever. Well, then you should have banned it. I mean,
Yeah.
either you do or you don't. But
okay, I'm going to play devil's advocate here for just a couple seconds. I agree 1,000% what you just said, Dale. But part of the problem was there wasn't a lot of truth being given out about that afterwards, and that all caught up with them.
Right.
I think that's more of a problem than, and you gave it a great explanation on that, but it didn't happen. Okay. We didn't do this. And then it just evolved into what it is. And I'm not saying good, bad, or, I try to stay out of it and don't have an opinion on it at all. But I do like to put the whole thing out there. And for somebody like John that now has to write a name on a ballot or click a box or whatever, that must be agony to a certain degree.
Yeah, it is. And that first ballot, I was so conflicted because I had covered Bonds. I knew how damn good he was. Like there was nobody better. Like he's going to the Hall of Fame whether he uses the cream and clear or not. I mean, he was good enough. It was remarkable to watch him hit home runs the way he was hitting home runs that year. He also took his shirt off in the locker room in the clubhouse. And I had covered the 49ers the previous season. Lee Woodall was a linebacker for the Niners. He was a physical specimen and became a bodybuilder after football. Yeah, Lee Woodall would take his shirt off and everybody would go like, holy moly, like this guy's ripped. Bonds took his shirt off. He looked like Lee Woodall. And I was like, this is alarming. Like you knew something was going on, but Dale's right. Like there were no rules against it. It wasn't on the books. And I think the thing that's interesting about baseball, and you guys can speak to this better than anybody, there's a code in baseball that very much relies upon ethics and playing above board and doing things the right way. And there's a right and wrong way to do things. And so I think this becomes a bigger issue in baseball than it becomes in other sports because the players often had to police themselves and the umpires were policing the game. And you expected to at least deal with a measure of integrity with each other. But you had the same era give us Marion Jones and Lance Armstrong cheating with his yellow jerseys. He was not just on the bike. And then you had Balco. And then you had, let's go even further back. In the financial world, you had Enron, where they were cooking the books. And then you had the mortgage crisis. And so you had this real, I think, cultural crisis of ethics and conscience that was going on nationally. And then baseball had, Sosa, McGuire hitting home runs like never before. And everybody was watching baseball all of a sudden. I understand why the owners didn't make it a big issue. I had an issue a decade later when they said, hey, you're a voter now. Can you help us clean up baseball? And I was like, that he played. The Baseball Hall of Fame's a museum. Maybe you just put a wing in there and you go, hey, this was you have the lights be low. This was a dark time in baseball history, but this stuff happened. I think ignoring it is not the right
I think
path.
ignoring it doesn't make any sense at
Yeah.
all. It's
If
like having a museum where you ignore the Civil War, or you
Yeah.
ignore I mean it was an ugly part of our history, but it was a part of our history, and I mean
Yeah.
and that's how you learn, hopefully,
Well,
in the future.
if you go to Cooperstown now, there's nothing in there about the steroid era, but they have Rose's bunch of Rose's gear in there, the balls and
Mm.
things like that. But MLB,
They have his
sports in
what?
general, they bury their heads in all of this stuff.
Yeah.
MLB with the steroids and now the gambling, look, they're making money. They don't care. That's the bottom line. MLB is making money. They made money off the steroids. Now it's a bad thing. I mean, they were packing the stadiums, and then all of a sudden, oh, we can't have that. They're so hypocritical. MLB is the worst.
And you know what? We were out there with them during that era and stuff like that. That was right in the middle of our careers and such. And you know what? We observed, we had an idea, and but you know what? We very rarely talked about it. I mean, I'm talking about
Yeah,
in our clubhouses and stuff.
yeah.
I don't remember sitting around and, maybe McGuire hit one 700 feet or something like that. That was just McGuire. I had McGuire in the minor leagues. I had Canseco in the minor leagues. And, McGuire was not a specimen in the minor leagues. He was a specimen in the big leagues. But you know what? I don't recall. Do you, Dale? Did you guys sit around and have,
No,
steroid
we didn't.
talks?
I mean, it was swirling around and this and that, but it really wasn't on a topic. But what's funny, Jimmy, is you saw how big these guys got. You really saw it when they stopped taking it. I
Oh,
remember coming to spring
absolutely.
training and seeing for the first time Pudge Rodriguez, and it was like he was wearing a uniform three sizes too big or
Right.
something. It was like, well, apparently we've changed our workout habits or something. But it's it was uh, it was pretty obvious. John, it took 10 years to get a vote for the Hall of Fame. So once you have that established, how long are you a voter?
Yeah, you're allowed to be a voter as long as you are covering baseball in some capacity. And they'll ask you, there's a series of questions. They'll ask you, hey, how much are you covering? I've kept the vote, even though Portland doesn't have an MLB team, because there's a chance Portland gets an MLB team. I'd have to start over. I also kept the vote because I was voting on guys that I saw play. I'm starting now to see guys on the ballot that I didn't see play. And I do have some feelings about, should I continue to be a voter? Should I not? Is this legit or not? I have a Heisman Trophy vote as well. I
Right.
feel like there's a lot of regional bias in the Heisman vote that rears its head. The baseball bias tends to be old guard writers versus new guard writers and what the expectations of those Hall of Fame careers are. We won't get to see Pete Rose on our ballot because he will go to that committee that is the special committee. He won't be part of the normal ballot. And I think Rose will get in. I think there may be a little bit of a waiting period for him. They may not put him in on the first ballot just as a measure of the baseball, having a code. I don't think it's a shoe in, but I think the guy with more hits than anybody in the game deserves to be in there. But tell the ugly truth. Be
Yep.
like, hey, he was kind of a scumbag and he bet on things and he lied about it, and put that on the plaque when you put him in there. Just tell the truth about it, and I think people will accept. You know, the Negro League Hall of Fame in Kansas City. I don't know if you guys have been there,
Yeah.
but
No.
it is fantastic.
Yep.
And you walk through it, and not everything in there is happy. Like, it tells a story of America and race relations, and yeah, I felt ashamed of our country and our civil rights history after walking through there. But man, it was the real story, and baseball should do that with Cooperstown.
In Cooperstown, they don't want any scandal. They want everything. I work with the Hall of Fame, and they don't want any scandal. They want everything sweet and clean, and no controversies. That's their shtick. Jane Forbes Clark does not want any scandal whatsoever. That's like the rule of thumb. So, I agree with you. They should have something there where they say, hey, look, Bonds, he was juiced. Pudge Rodriguez was on it. We know that. Um, Piazza was on it. They need to tell the truth on these guys. They can't. They sugarcoat everything at the Hall of Fame. That's a problem.
Yeah,
Well,
it would be. Yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I guess you won't have a vote on Jimmy and I will go to a committee, but just throw your influence around.
Now I know why you're having me on.
See there, now it comes out of it. 50
Now, once
minutes
you
into
found
it.
out I'm not voting, you're like, okay, forget
Yeah,
it.
yeah. Payback's a bitch.
Hey, John, when Dale plays golf, I got a bunch of football
Whoa,
helmets
whoa, whoa,
back
whoa, whoa,
there.
whoa, whoa, whoa. Hold on 1 second.
Yeah,
Rephrase that
they know
sentence.
better than that. I just look the part.
When Dale goes to the golf tournament.
Yeah.
Yes, I got, if you guys need helmets for the other guys, I got some they can
Thank
use.
Yeah,
you.
but they won't even let me, I'm smart enough not to even tee off. Although at John's a couple of years ago, I was with the guys. I said I don't play, and I was just feeding them with a lot of stories. We were laughing, but they said, well, at least you can putt.
Yeah, get on the green.
And I put I hit like
Oh,
4 greens. I mean, hit the hole in 4 greens, and they're going, "You're a shark. You're just trying to,
hold
which
on.
is not true."
Technical problem.
Uh-oh, Jimmy's melting down over there.
Absolutely.
Either that or he's got to
I
get a
gotta
second cup of coffee.
no, I have my second cup right here and I'm jittery. I gotta tell a quick story about John's tournament. I don't know. I've been playing it, I guess, now 7, 8 years, I guess. And it's the one time a year I get to play golf because I don't do that anymore, but I have a blast doing it. And you should see this turnout. It is so cool. And I've been blessed that I think the last 5 times the same group has asked for me to be their quote unquote celebrity golf person or partner. And it's Jason and Anthony with I can't think of the millwright's name off
High
the
caliber millwrights.
that's it. And they are just Jason's the dad and Anthony's the son. And when we play in this golf tournament, there are certain holes on the golf tournament that John has set up for, it's fun, the fun things. And so there's the one hole where you roll the dice and if the higher the dice number, the closer to the hole you get. So we always have Anthony roll the dice, and Anthony every time comes up with a 6. And so that puts us right on the edge of the green, but it puts you about 75 feet away from the hole. So 2 years ago, we had established golfers. These two guys could play. As a matter of fact, we finished second in the tournament. Didn't even know who these two guys were because Jason, two partners, couldn't make it because they got hurt. So we're all putting, and we aren't 10 feet close to the pin. Anthony, who I respectfully, I love him to death, but he can't play golf. He has, he, I love him so much, and he's just a great kid. And he goes out there and he plays all 18 holes. It might take him a little longer than most, but he got up there, and I'm standing by the flag. And I'm not kidding you guys, it's 75 feet away. And Anthony just gets up there and whack. And I'm standing there and I'm watching this ball come down, and it's coming and it's coming and it's coming. It hits the flag, goes straight up in the air, and bounces back down into the cup. And I'm screaming. That was the highlight of the whole tournament. And we're just high-fiving and everything. Anthony is just beside himself. But that's what the beauty of the tournament is. This isn't to go out and win the tournament. This is go out there to have fun and do it for the kids that are involved. And Anthony did the same thing on the next trick hole and did it again. And he didn't hit a tee shot off the tee, within 20 feet. So, folks, when you go to John's website, and it's thebaldfacedtruth.org, right, John?
Yeah, baldfacetruth.org. Yep.
Okay. There's success stories on it. There's stories about what is done with John's organization. And not only that, you can make a donation. I think that's very important. I wanted to get that out there before we got any farther because it's important. It's a great foundation. And remember, it's for kids. This and his overhead is his family. That's what his overhead is. So I just want to put that out there for John.
Before we have a few minutes left, John, you have covered extensively college football and the implosion that it has had the last several years. really that tidal wave started when Oklahoma and Texas
Mhm.
said they were leaving and going to the SEC, and then of course SC and UCLA, then Oregon and Washington, then whole implosion of the Pac-12. Where's this all going? I mean, is it going to be just two super conferences and everybody else playing for peanuts, or how does that work?
Isn't it already though, in a
It
way?
is.
Like
It
Pretty
it
is.
much.
kind of
Yeah.
it is. I mean, I
Yep.
Notre Dame got in there last year, but I was at that college football playoff championship game last year, and I thought, will we ever see anybody not name Notre Dame or the Big Ten and SEC in this title game again? The revenue that is being distributed to those schools in those two conferences and Notre Dame leaves everybody else at a huge competitive disadvantage. This is the equivalent of, the Dodgers and the Yankees played in the World Series. That's what we're getting in college football as well, is we're getting the haves against the haves. I think there's a real hope that this House settlement will bring some change, that, at least there's a cap now. I've talked to some of the schools in the Big 12 and the ACC and the Pac-12, and they are hopeful that at least they know there's a spending cap now. How close can we get to it? There's a hope there, but I think the long-term prognosis is everybody knows that the Big Ten and the SEC want to split off. I don't think all of the schools in the Big Ten and the SEC would be part of it. So there's some jockeying going on in the Big 12, the ACC, and then now the group of six, where everybody's trying to say, hey, if there's a cutoff point, and maybe it's 40 teams, maybe it's 48 teams, maybe it's 36 teams, who knows? If there's a cutoff point, can we get within that cutoff point? And that's what Boise State's trying to do, right? They're trying to get to the playoff and matter and be there. So the next 5 years, and so I don't think we're going to see any massive fracture in the next 5 years, but in about 2030, I think you're going to see a lot of posturing and a lot of talk about what happens next, what it will look like. Will Vanderbilt be able to stay in the SEC, or are they going to squeeze Mississippi State and Vanderbilt out? And is Purdue going to get knocked out of the Big Ten because the Big Ten goes, we'd rather have Utah and we'd rather have Boise State? I think there's a real danger that you're going to eliminate large swaths of the country, particularly in the Pacific time zone. Oregon's great. USC could potentially contend. But beyond those two programs, you don't have anything really west of the Rocky Mountains that is going to be in play. UCLA is not going to do it. Washington's got disadvantages. So I think there's a real worry out there, and I think it's challenging apathy. It's challenging, the morale of fans everywhere. Even the fans that are part of the fan bases that are with the haves are looking over going, hey, I miss the tradition. I miss, like, who's on the team now, the transfer portal. So there's a lot of that going on. But I think in 5 years, I think 2030 or so, you're going to see, like 48 teams separate. And I think you're going to see football separate from other sports. And it's going to want to become the NFL light. And I don't think that's good. I don't think that's going to be good for interest from fans. But it's being driven by television. ESPN and Fox are driving this whole thing.
And the thing about it is, I believe exactly what you said about NFL light on that. And I wish that cooler heads would have prevailed and they would have just done this with football when they got together to do this, instead of putting all the sports together. Like Oregon's gymnastic team has to fly all the way to the East Coast and participate there. And the one team that got really screwed out of the whole deal is Oregon State baseball. And look what they're still doing. It's amazing. And
it shows how good that program is.
Exactly. And you know what? They could have been, if they would have put Oregon State in the whatever division they want to put them in, and Oregon State baseball would have stayed in the Pac-12. Oregon baseball stayed, and Oregon competed in baseball this year, but I wish they would have maybe sat down and said, let's just keep things the same and let's just mess with football.
Yeah, and I think they're seeing that now when they're these volleyball teams and all the chaos with these other tiered sports. The other thing I wanted to ask you, John, is more of a local thing, but Portland Trailblazers, they finally are going to be sold. They're finally going to be under the outside the thumbprint of Jody. But I think it was a shame that Phil Knight didn't get that team a couple of years ago. which I think would have really invigorated. You can tell us. I mean, we know the Portland Trailblazer fan base is a rabid fan base. I mean, they live and breathe it, but they've had not a lot to live and breathe here for several seasons. So, do you see them making a good? Do you see a good ownership group coming in here? Do you see them possibly leaving Portland? How is this going to play out? Because a lot of people are worried.
Yeah, the Blazer fans are anxious because they have long feared that the team would be moved to Seattle. That's where Paul Allen was from, I'm telling people I don't see that happening because I think the NBA owners are already counting the expansion fees. They're expected to get somewhere around $6 billion per franchise for Las Vegas and Seattle. It's the worst kept secret in the NBA that Adam Silver wants to put two teams there. And I don't think the owners are going to allow somebody to come in and buy the Blazers and cannibalize one of those $6 billion expansion paydays. And so I think Seattle will get an expansion team, Vegas will get an expansion team, but I think first Portland needs to be sold. To your point, Jody Allen, this wasn't her team. She didn't own it. She was a trustee. She inherited it from her brother. She's supposed to be managing it. She's done a poor job managing it. You can tell she doesn't care. It's like me watering my neighbor's lawn. Like okay. But it's in the end, I think, anything would be better than Jody. But you're right. Like Phil Knight, if you want to take a holistic approach, Jody should have taken his call and she didn't. I was told that, by an NBA executive, I said, why would Jody treat Phil Knight like trash? Like he made this offer. She wouldn't even return his call. She had a lieutenant, an underling, return the call and basically say the team's not for sale. If you eventually want to sell this team, you would have cultivated Phil Knight as a potential bidder. Absolutely. That would have been in your best interest. Like you're going to put this thing on the open market. You don't take Phil Knight out of the equation. You don't take his paddle away. And she did. And she mocked him by putting out a news release saying, the team might not be sold for 10 to 20 years. I mean, everybody knew he was 85 years old. So it was like, she was basically middle finger. Like, how dare you put it out there that you want to make an offer for this team? So I asked an NBA executive, I said, what's she doing there? And they said, well, there's nothing that a billionaire likes more than telling another billionaire to pound sand.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then Jody's problem is she isn't really the billionaire. Like she's, the sister of the billionaire. So finally this team's going to be sold. I'm not convinced that Knight's out of this, even though he has issued a statement saying, I'm too old, I won't be bidding. I think it was kind of his FU back to her. Like, hey, I'm not going to create leverage for you. I'm out of this. Like, go out in the open market and see what you can get.
Right.
I have talked to some ownership groups that I think would be interested in talking to Knight and maybe bringing him in at the 11th hour to be the kind of over the top, let me make a financial contribution to make sure this happens. Because everything that Phil Knight has done is legacy. He doesn't want to own and operate this team. He just wants to make sure it stays in his hometown. And so I think Blazer fans are excited. There's some apprehension. It's supposed to happen this next NBA season, 2025, 2026, that it will change hands. Will she take a holistic approach? Probably not. Probably going to be the highest bidder. She probably won't care who that person is. And in fact, there's probably some motivation that the next ownership group doesn't do as well as they did, even though they didn't get to the playoffs. They were in the lottery every year. I don't think she cares what happens to the team, but I'm hopeful that maybe Phil Knight comes in as part of an ownership group, and things get changed. Because Dale's right. Like the fan base, rabid, they'll sell that building out. They're in an abusive relationship with their NBA team, and they just love it. They love that team and love that franchise, and they're just eager to get back on board with it.
And just real quick, ownership group, baseball in Portland, MLB. Jimmy and I would love it. We've seen the renderings of the stadium. It just looks magical almost, and where it would be set up on the river and everything. But man, do we really have a shot?
I think there's a shot, but it requires Rob Manfred to be interested in expanding. Let's start there. Like he's talked about wanting to do this for a long time. Let's get the A's settled. Let's get the Rays settled. Are they? Like, I keep going. Come on now. Like, what are we talking about here? But I think once that happens and he says, hey, we are expanding. It's Salt Lake. It's Portland. Maybe it's Nashville. and they're all jockeying for, probably two franchises. Everyone's pitted Salt Lake City against Portland. I'm not totally convinced. I mean, what if Salt Lake City and Portland are the best two options and they both look viable? I could see a realignment in baseball that would make it work. Like, it wouldn't be that difficult to do it. They've done it before. So I think the Portland Diamond Project's doing everything they can possibly do. They've got the stadium renderings. It looks like it would be the best stadium in Major League Baseball. I think it would be well supported. In the end, though, if Manfred doesn't say we're going to expand, you're just sitting there like holding a ticket and waiting like you're at the butcher shop and they never call your number. Like, it's, in the end, I think it's ambitious, but I have not seen the full investor list. I did get the first peek at the Diamond Project investor list, and it was a lot of local business owners and local money that really just trying to do something philanthropic for Portland, almost like, putting a couple $1,000,000 into this thing was a donation. I am told that there is a minority owner in another ball club who is part of the potential ownership group. I find that interesting. I kind of wondered if it was somebody in the A's family based on the way that it was positioned, but it's very hard, as you guys know, to even find out who owns the Mariners. Like, who are the minority owners of the Mariners? Like, we don't really know, and the teams don't put that out there.
I don't know if you'd want anybody from the A's because that is a complete shit show.
Yeah.
I mean, they're playing in a ballpark that no one likes. Everybody's complaining about it. They haven't turned ground in Vegas yet for their new ballpark, so they're stuck in a minor league ballpark for at least 4 years and probably 5 or 6. I mean, it's a complete joke. I don't know.
It's really kind of funny because Dale and I know I have a very good friend that's one of the investors, um and I know Dale has talked to these people too, and I've sat down and talked to him. Art Lawrence was a great backer in this, who was a local umpire, but also a philanthropist and stuff like that. And I know a couple other guys, and the one of the problems I see here is the politics of everything here in the Northwest, and we're a one horse town right now, and you can't tell me we couldn't support a Major League Baseball team. You just can't. You can't convince me of that. But once again, it's going to take money to do that, and I'm messing with my camera, aren't I? Again.
Well, no,
Sorry.
you look good, Jimmy.
There you go.
Never looked better.
I look much better. But it's. I actually sat down with Manfred when he was in a locker room with us one time, and I asked him about Portland, and it was, well, maybe, well, that's not a very good.
No, I haven't. It never seemed like they were really on the radar on Park Avenue.
Yeah.
They're now on 6th Avenue or whatever now.
Yes.
But
Well, they're talking Montreal too, but you
Yes.
can't go back to the you guys know about the Dome. I mean, that place is horrible.
Yes.
You have to play there until you get a ballpark built.
Yes.
And the Big
But see,
O
that's
is
also- But you can't do that here in Portland. You can't build the ballpark without
no,
a
there is no
team.
ballpark for them to play. You got to have a ballpark for them to play. In Salt Lake City, they got 2 minor league ballparks, but can you expand them into major league ballparks? I mean, they talking about that in Sacramento, but that's not viable at all. I mean, it's you're putting lipstick on a pig. It's a great minor league ballpark, but it's not major league ready. And
well, one of the positives to Portland that we haven't had is we finally have a governor and local the mayor and everybody that are finally backing this, at least, where we had a city, a government, and local governments that just really didn't care in the past.
Yeah, and they recently passed. They had a bond from 2003 that gave them, a set amount of money to build a stadium, and it's a jock tax. It's based on taxing the players' salaries, and I don't know why, but people have a hard time figuring that out. Like when Steph Curry plays against the Blazers, he pays Oregon income tax. He pays about $60,000 a game to play a game in Portland. And so the same would happen with Shohei Ohtani and Aaron Judge or whoever was coming to town. And it passed. I mean, they passed the measure. And so now get $800 million towards the ballpark, which is a huge
Right.
step up for Portland. So at least that's there. But if Rob Manfred never comes in and says, "Hey, we're expanding,"
Right.
and Portland, Salt Lake, and Nashville are the finalists, we're going to pick two. If he never says that, it's never happening. So it's kind of like, hey, you're on the clock now, MLB.
And just to let everybody know, the umpires are included in the jock tax, even though we're not the jocks.
It's it's a smaller scale.
Yeah,
but
smaller scale.
We would put in our taxes not just for Oregon where we live.
Absolutely.
It was like 25 other places, cities and states. It was unbelievable.
Well, we're up against it, guys.
Thank you, Michael Jordan.
John, thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah,
Really
we
appreciate
John,
it.
That was
thank
awesome.
thanks for coming on. We really appreciate having you on. And if you're in Portland, give this guy a listen. He knows his shit, for lack of a better term. John, thank you again. Again, we'll be back again soon.
I think we'll
And
use that
always
in a
remember,
commercial.
what's that,
I think
Jimmy?
we'll use that in a commercial. I think
You could use that in
Josh should use
commercial.
that in a
Yeah.
commercial.
Yeah, do I get a residual for it?
No.
Oh, thanks. Anyway, guys, remember, everybody, take the road to the left. You never know what you'll find.
And subscribe.
And subscribe. Thank you, Dale. Take care. Bye-bye.